In the autumn of 1962, East-West tension, already running dangerously high, reached flashpoint. Soviet cargo ships were spotted in mid-Atlantic heading for Cuba with consignments of missiles. The world seemed perched on the brink of another catastrophic war. On the 22nd of October, Kennedy broadcast to the nation.
Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. The purpose of these bases can be none other than to provide a nuclear strike capability against the Western Hemisphere.
The United States reacted to this Soviet threat by instituting a naval blockade of Cuba. With Soviet and American warships steaming in the Atlantic on a collision course, the world held its breath. Khrushchev addressed Kennedy in a message in Russian broadcast by Moscow radio. The bases in Cuba would be dismantled and the missiles returned to the Soviet Union. This momentous broadcast on that fateful day was monitored by the BBC monitoring service, translated and relayed immediately through official channels to Washington. Kennedy responded, relying on the monitored text, because he said, "I attach tremendous significance to acting quickly with a view to solving the Cuba crisis." Today, the monitoring service continues to play a vital role, as it has done for over 4 decades. Based at Caversham Park, a 19th century mansion in Berkshire, the monitoring service operates round the clock with some 400 staff, listening to and reporting on the torrent of words which swamp the airwaves around the world.
And as a consequence, the threat of a nuclear war has sharply grown.
Well, the monitoring service is an integral part of the BBC. It is specifically part of the external services, and that means it is funded, as the rest of the external services, by monies voted by Parliament, a grant in aid. It really started in a very modest way when the BBC began foreign language broadcasts in 1938 and found the need to know what the broadcasters in the areas to which it was broadcast were saying, and also what other external broadcasters were saying to those target countries. The functions have not basically changed since the organisation was started in 1939. We are the national agency for intercepting and disseminating facts and comments and information about what is going on in the world as derived from foreign broadcasts.
The story begins in the heart of the country at nearby Crosley Park, which is set in 200 acres of quiet grazing land in South Oxfordshire. Crosley Park is the receiving station of the monitoring service and has an extensive array of aerials and sophisticated equipment. It's manned 24 hours a day by engineering staff, on whose expertise depends the monitor's ability to hear and process poorly received signals.
We receive signals here for the monitoring service. The receivers in this room you see around you are used to pick up signals from other foreign broadcasters, and those signals are actually relayed to the monitoring service by a landline. For example, at the present time we're receiving Moscow World Service, and if you listen to this receiver, that has got Moscow World Service, which is now being monitored by the monitoring service at Caversham. You can see here that there are a large number of switching facilities which actually switch the output of the receivers onto the various lines, and the engineer here is busy checking some of the signals that he is now sending to the service, to the monitoring service itself.
Can you see if you can do something with it, please? It's okay, thank you.
Reception department, with 129 monitors and about 100 supporting staff, is responsible for monitoring approximately 500 broadcasts round the clock in some 35 languages. Each of these broadcasts can range in duration from 5 minutes to an hour and a half.
Yes, well, we use the term monitor in a very precise fashion, and it covers a variety of processes. Obviously, the first thing the monitor has to do is to listen to whatever he's tasked with. But beyond that, he has to make an immediate judgment to select items and decide what is worth processing and what is not worth processing. The monitor clearly needs to have a very good grasp of the language that he's monitoring, and he needs to be extremely well informed about the area or country for which he's responsible, so that he can see not only the very obvious news items which may come up, but also the implications of what may seem to be innocuous talks or commentaries, to which there is a hidden historical or political dimension which would not be evident to someone who didn't know the area well. And it's particularly complex because we are by nature a reactive organisation. We have to respond to news which we cannot anticipate. And to some extent our work expands and contracts according to the amount of news that is available. We may tune in to what we expect to be a 5-minute news broadcast and find that it turns into a 3.5-hour speech. We cannot turn off after 5 minutes. And this requires a lot of coordination. The main coordinating function is done by the reception department supervisor, who sits in the center of the listening room, and it's his responsibility to maintain coverage according to the pattern that we've laid out, but also to respond to any ad hoc requirements that may be made of him, and generally to make sure that the listening room is covering all those areas for which we're responsible.
So what are monitors looking out for when they listen to broadcasts?
Well, we know clearly what our consumers are interested in. It is news in its widest sense, from straight news reporting of events that occur, through speeches, to current affairs discussions, to a great variety of social and cultural events which may reflect on the life of the country we're monitoring.
To be effective, reception department obviously needs to know which broadcasts are worth monitoring. This requires the compilation and constant updating of selective program schedules of foreign broadcasting organizations.
The major task of this section, which is the World Schedule section, is to collect as much information as we can about radio and television stations around the world, especially the programs that they broadcast, the programs that we would be interested in, that's news and current affairs type programs, the frequencies on which they're broadcast, the times at which they're broadcast. And apart from aiding the day-to-day operation in the listening room, we also have a researcher there whose task it is to make sure that all the information that we do have on store is kept up to date. And we do publish here in the World Schedule section a news document dealing with broadcasting around the world. In fact, it's quite a comprehensive document. In the course of the past year, in fact, we carried details of broadcasting in some 130 odd countries around the world. That's news about future plans, new services, television services, radio services, even satellite services.
The monitoring service also covers about 100 transmissions a day in English and foreign languages from some 25 foreign news agencies, a task undertaken by Reception Department's radio telegraphy section.
These are one of the radio teletype signals that we're taking now, and what we're doing is picking up that signal, feeding it from the receiver into the teleprinter converter unit. This is then converting that audio tone into a number of voltages, which is then going out to one of the teleprinters that you see around the section here. Here we have Bill Sharp, who's the research listening operator on shift at the moment. And what Bill is doing is going around these various agencies, and what we're trying to do is to compile the transmission schedule. That is the time they come up, the time they go down, and the various frequencies on which they're transmitting at that particular time, and how many services they're transmitting them. This particular aspect of our work was of great value during the Falkland crisis. We don't normally take any of the South American news agencies here, but of course because we've done a lot of research into these transmissions, when the Falkland Island thing blew up and we had the trouble with Argentina, we were immediately able to cover all the Argentinian news agencies, which gave us a lot of useful information.
Even in this age of advanced technology, world coverage is a tall order. The BBC Monitoring Service and the official American Monitoring Service share this mammoth task. a partnership dating back to the Second World War.
In simple terms, the BBC is responsible for coverage of the Soviet Union, Eastern and Western Europe, North Africa through to Saudi Arabia, into Iran and Afghanistan. From our unit in Nairobi, we are able to cover East and Central Africa and up into the Horn of Africa.
The Monitoring Service's East African unit is located near Nairobi in Kenya. The locally recruited monitors cover approximately 70 broadcasts a day in, for instance, Amharic, Arabic, Portuguese, Somali and Swahili. Edited on the spot by BBC expatriate staff, this material is teleprinted to Caversham daily. Over the years, the East African unit has provided comprehensive coverage of many crises in Eastern Africa. Caversham Park is often the only source of information when a crisis erupts in a country and normal communications with the outside world are cut off. This was the case with Hungary in 1956. And the desperate cry for help was flashed to the world from Caversham.
This is Hungary calling. This is Hungary calling. The last remaining station. Call to the United Nations. Early this morning, the Soviet troops launched a general attack on Hungary. We are requesting you to send us immediate aid in the form of parachute troops over the Trans-Danubian provinces. For the sake of God and freedom, help Hungary.
In 1968, Czechoslovakia's bid for socialism with a human face was ended by the Warsaw Pact armies.
Before noon today, units of the occupying armies had virtually completed their takeover of the headquarters of the Czechoslovak Armed Forces General Staff. This action began yesterday evening. All Czechoslovak military personnel found on the premises have been disarmed after refusing to cooperate with the invasion command. Colonel Emil Vatopek, the famous Olympic running champion of bygone years, has proclaimed that the Soviet Union, by its action in illegally invading Czechoslovakia, has deprived itself of any right to participate in the Olympic Games.
They have repeatedly stated on the radio in their transmissions that they are still broadcasting as the free and legal Czechoslovak radio, and in fact in the early morning they said several times that the occupation forces were outside the radio building and that it was possible that they'd be invaded any moment, and that the listeners should note that when the Czechoslovak anthems are being played, that this meant that they were no longer able to broadcast.
In 1980, Poland plunged into turmoil. Gdansk, Szczecin, Katowice became familiar place names. Incensed by the government's latest attempt to raise food prices, the Polish workers rose and solidarity was born, led by Lech Wałęsa. The Polish media told the incredible story and Caversham was listening. But on the 13th of December 1981, the climax came.
At first, Warsaw Radio behaved quite normally, but from midnight onwards, all bulletins carried the same news items, repeating the government statement that all anti-state activities had to cease. And then at 5 o'clock in the morning of the 13th of December, that is 6 o'clock Warsaw time, came the momentous announcement.
General Jaruzelski, broadcasting over Warsaw Radio, announced the proclamation of martial law with effect from midnight. The Polish renewal was no more. The Solidarity saga was chronicled by Kevin Ruane in a book based mainly on monitored material, The Polish Challenge, a BBC publication. Crises will continue to occur, and Caversham will continue to cover them. But the advent of satellite communications, and with it of television monitoring, has added a significant new dimension. In the past, only the audio channel of television broadcasts could be picked up. Now Caversham can monitor the pictures as well, and already covers Soviet television programs.
Right, good morning. Just before we start, a couple of general points. You should have heard the announcement about...
Listening to broadcasts is only part of the story.
And
The morning meeting brings together senior staff from Reception Department and the News and Publications Department, which is responsible for the Monitoring Service's news file and its documentation service.
This meeting this afternoon, please could you try and release as many of your staff as possible.
Senior Duty Editor News Bureau is the first to brief the daily meeting.
Helsinki Radio says divers are today searching a lake for parts of the rogue missile. Yesterday the Finns reported some parts had already been found. I have some copies of the Express story if anybody would like them.
News Bureau operates 24 hours a day. Its news file reflects about 2% of the daily 500,000 words intake, a very thorough copy-tasting operation. Its awareness of news breaks is maintained through monitors, the links with the External Services newsroom, and international news agencies. When a very hot story comes in, it's immediately subbed once the duty editor has checked that the main thrust of the item is correct. The BBC newsrooms are alerted and the story is ready for release.
Okay, it's an order.
Within minutes, it will be out on the printer.
Well, the News Bureau's brief is to provide a fast teleprinted news service to a wide range of customers. Prime customers include BBC External Services newsroom in Bush House in London and a number of government consumers. We also supply a service to a range of commercial customers and of course to BBC domestic radio and television. We have within our ranks quite a number of ex-monitors, and we have a number of people also who have got journalistic experience elsewhere in the BBC and outside the BBC. They have the skills to get quickly through this material. However, they also need to have the ability to read between the lines, particularly when we're talking about East Bloc, Communist Bloc material. We try at all costs to avoid interpretation. There is no room really for gloss in the News Bureau's work. We do not say things like in the sharpest attack ever, as Western news agencies do. What we do is bring a pure quote up to the top of a story because we feel that is the main point.
The daily and weekly documents, the summary of world broadcasts, are printed on the premises. 4 sections, each led by a regional editor, cover between them the USSR, Eastern Europe, the Far East, and finally the Middle East, Africa, Latin America, and Western Europe.
Okay, so that's an improvement. Very good.
Editor News and Publications holds regular briefings with his 4 regional editors.
And one final point, international terrorism. I know there's not a lot of this stuff about, but if you do get any, I'd be glad if you would get it in, treat it pretty generously.
Although priorities have to be reviewed in the light of world events,
any other points?
The particular requirements of individual consumers are never forgotten.
Henry, can we hold on to the special telex service as late as possible? We ought to get in any Libyan reaction on this latest Gulf War peace initiative.
Yes, okay. There's always the News Bureau who can stop press the items.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Each day, over 500,000 words flow through editorial, out of which no more than 90,000 words are published in the 4 daily documents. An editorial query about an ambiguous sentence in a monitor's transcript is discussed. Regional editors are responsible for the accuracy of the material they publish, and consultations with monitors are part of the essential teamwork.
Hello, Far East. Oh, hello. Yes, I can check that for you. I'll call you back. Bye. Pat, that was the Foreign Office.
A consumer wants to know when Karmal was last mentioned by Kabul radio.
We have had something. You'll find it on World Reporter.
Okay,
Well, that's
check it out.
the quickest way.
World Reporter is one of the data banks which store monitored material. It helps to answer such queries promptly. Some customers need the daily and weekly documents in electronic form to be able to retrieve information selectively. So in addition to hard copies, The documents are also fed directly to data banks at home and abroad, a fast-growing market. The selection and allocation of material for editing out of the vast amount of reports reaching the main editorial room is the primary function of regional editors. They're the point of reference for the area they cover and are responsible to editor news and publications for the end product.
About 10 minutes. Okay, goodbye. Debbie, could you send this to the Russian section Bush House urgently? They need it for this afternoon.
And Halifax?
Yes.
The telefax service is the fastest means of conveying lengthy material to a consumer who may, for instance, need the full text of a statement or speech urgently. The telefax terminal at his end will produce a photocopy of the text as it's fed into the machine at Caversham. In addition to the 4 daily documents, each editorial section produces a comprehensive weekly economic report covering their respective areas.
These weekly and daily publications are our vehicle for the monitoring service's main product, documentation of what's said in broadcasts, on news agencies, to some extent in the press, all around the world, which is of interest to our prime clients. Now, the BBC itself is one of those. It's invaluable material for an understanding of the areas to which we broadcast in the external services, and of course as an input to the scripted material in those broadcasts themselves. The government is another, and to them we're a fast and reliable source of what was actually said on issues of importance. And then we've got a very varied community of commercial clients, libraries, embassies, business concerns, so on and so forth. The service that these report writers provide is, first of all, the selection of material from a massive raw material, and that alone involves a very detailed understanding of what clients require. And then they render the material into good, meaningful English. That means to say they get rid of translation problems. And at the end of the process, they are the guarantee that the contained information has been checked, has been authenticated, that its relevance has been pointed out. But what we do not do here, of course, is to analyse. That we leave to our customers.
One of those customers is based in Oxford, which of course abounds with academics. There are those from the graduate colleges of the University of Oxford who specialise in the study of international affairs, contemporary history and social studies. Oxford Analytica is a consulting firm which relies on academics for its daily analysis of current events. It subscribes not only to the news file, but also to the daily summary of world broadcasts.
We use the BBC monitoring service a great deal. We use it as a primary source on which to base our analysis. We get the wire service in and we have people monitoring it 24 hours. And they then get in touch with the academics, or the academics come in here and use it as a basis for their analysis. We find it very valuable because it is, in scholarly terms, a primary source. It gives you the facts straight and unvarnished, and we then do the interpretation and the analysis. We also find it gives a great deal of detail, which is often not available elsewhere. Another thing we find useful is the ability to ring up your people in Caversham and either ask for more details or occasionally even just to bounce ideas off to them to say, well, we're a bit puzzled by this, what do you think about it? And we find you have some very high quality people there who can be very useful in that capacity.
Leading national dailies are customers of the monitoring service, among them The Times. Despite their extensive network of correspondence, they find Caversham's products valuable.
There is an enormous difference, we know, between what governments say to us for publication and what they say to their own people. And part of the function, I believe, of this newspaper is to be aware of that difference and to expose it when we can in some way, possibly in the assessment in our commentary. And of course the summary of the broadcasts provide this service better than anybody, because again we couldn't afford to have correspondents sitting listening in to local broadcasts and or having to have them translated. And I think the final main reason is that in addition to our deployment of foreign correspondents, we have here a critical faculty about what's going on in the world, which we want to exercise over and above whatever we receive from our own correspondence, in that one can't expect an individual necessarily to provide us with all the material which weighs on a judgment. And we like to be able to make those judgments here with raw material. And there is nothing more raw and therefore more real than some of the material in the summary of broadcasts, which provides us with a standard source of reference.
Caversham Park has been the home of the monitoring service since 1943. Now it has to respond and adapt to the requirements of the future.
In the late 70s, it had become clear that two major technological revolutions were going to affect our activities here at Caversham. One was in the whole area of broadcast dissemination techniques, the other was in the area of information technology. So we set up a modernisation committee in 1981, and after 2 years of work, we found ourselves with a 5-year development programme in 3 parts. One dealing with the whole area of reception facilities, the ability to monitor television, for instance, off satellites. The second is a big computer project. We shall be handling all our work processes here in computer, everything from inputting by monitors, processing by editors, right through to redissemination to clients. And then to house all this, of course, we've got a big high-tech building project. This received Treasury approval in 1983. We spent most of 1984 on pump priming activities, and in 1985 the project proper got underway and is on schedule now.
The shape of things to come. Undoubtedly, the future holds both challenges and opportunities.
The opportunities are there. We have the ability to collect more material. The problem is, how do we handle it? The modernisation programme will help us to be more efficient, I'm sure, with the computerised handling of information and so on. But nevertheless, the great task for the future, I think, is the assignment of priorities. With more and more material available, how do we decide what it is that we're going to cover, and how shall we continue to provide as good a service as I think we can honestly say we have managed to do over the last 45 years or so.
صرحت سيد خليل الوزير أبو جهاد نائب القائد العام للقوات الثورة
y que siguen nuestras tradiciones. Se desea proporcionar un mayor terreno que hasta ahora a los programas críticos.
Улучшить водопроводную воду можно разными способами. Прокипятить, а затем отстоять или подкислить лимонной кислотой. На 1 литр воды.
Emlékeztet arra, hogy Tokió a 70-es évek végétől amerikai nyomásra eltávolodott az enyhülési politikától. A szovjet nap szerint ez rendkívül